I don't know. Is it appropriate to talk about angelic genitalia on my podcast? I don't know. All right. It's going to be a weird one. So, there are assumptions that people make. This is one of I want to do a word from the word today. And it's on marriage in heaven.
Marriage, it is what brings us together today.
And there are assumptions that people make based off passages that, and I'm doing this study on eschatology. And in my personal opinion, everybody's got an opinion, I'm entitled to mine. But some of the flaws in eschatology are because people don't take eschatology, in terms of the scope of the whole scripture. And you miss things when you do that. And I think we miss things in terms of marriage in heaven. So there's this passage, and there's several different, versions of this in the Gospels, but they're all basically saying the same thing. This one's in Matthew 22. And it's a whole problem with marriage and the resurrection and the, the leaders of Israel and the Sadducees and all these guys are trying to trap Jesus all the time. And in this chapter, it's the whole idea of this widow, and her husband dies, and he's got all these brothers. And so she just goes from one brother to the next, and they're all dying, right? And so the question is, that was their cultural thing. So the question is, at the resurrection, or, in heaven, however you want to talk about it, who's she married to? She's been married to all the guys, all the boys in the family. And so Jesus gets really direct with them. But here's where we get the idea that there's not marriage in heaven. It's not a good idea. It's not even biblical. It's not true. But here's where that idea comes from. The idea comes from verse 30 of the chapter, when Jesus says, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. Okay. You have to understand, okay, that that marriage is in a context. And this is probably going to be a two-parter, because marriage at this point was being under assault. Hardcore. We'll talk about this in the next video next week. Next week, you're ready for this one, marriage. But marriage was under assault in their culture. I mean, just like they were, the Pharisees, even the disciples were complaining that you just couldn't divorce a woman for any reason that you wanted. The woman couldn't get a divorce, but the man could just, pitch the woman at any time and go get another one. And so marriage was under assault the way that it was. And so Jesus he's not saying that there won't be union and intimacy, a man and a woman coming together to become one, like Adam and Eve were before the fall. He's saying that your whole idea of marriage and the whole, like they basically were selling their daughters for, to men for dowry, for money. I mean, it was pathetic. It was terrible. And Jesus is like, yeah, we're not doing that. That's not going to be in my kingdom. So he's not so much saying we're not going to have marriage. He's just saying your whole version of it, understanding of it, yeah, it's broken. We're not doing that. The idea, and he says, we're going to be like the angels in heaven. Well, the assumption is, oh yeah, we're going to be like the angels who aren't married. Well, who said they aren't married? Like we infer that. Like who says they're not married? And in fact, I've read, places where they're like, well, angels are asexual. Well, no. We have biblical examples of both female and male angels. For instance, in Zechariah chapter 5, not Jesus. Okay. The prophet Zechariah, Jesus isn't around yet. The prophet Zechariah is in this conversation with this angel. And he's showing him some end times kind of prophecy and such. And in chapter 5, verse 5, this angel that's speaking to him shows him this woman in this basket. And then down in verse 9, 2 women show up, but you're obviously, you get the drift that they're not just women because they have wings. Okay. And they pick up this basket and they take it off, into the land where it's going to go. And these women are angels. Scholars talk about that. Okay. So you have women angels. And then we also have men angels back in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. It talks about how the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, so they make a distinction between the sons of God, and that was a phrase that could refer to angels back in their context. So these these male angels, these sons called sons of God, saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they choose. Now, really quickly, it says in verse 4, if you go down 2 verses, it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and the Nephilim are the offspring of male angels with female human beings. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So there's a couple things that's really significant here. We know we have female angels, and we know we have male angels, and male angels that had reproductive element to their life where they could reproduce. Female angels, male angels, and the male angels just didn't go and sleep with these women. Notice the language in verse 2, they married any of them that they chose. So angels got married. And the punishment for these guys, the punishment for these angels was not that they had, the punishment was not that they got married. The punishment was that they married women that were humans. That was what they were punished. They weren't supposed to marry, take human wives. That's what so you're under the impression they were supposed to take angelic wives. And there's a lot of crazy stuff out there you can read on this kind of thing, but it's very clear biblically that just to make the assumption, Matthew 22 and other places, that, well, we're going to be like the angels, and angels are asexual and they're like fireflies flying up in there. That's just not the biblical picture. And angels had reproductive possibilities. I mean, they literally produced, human giants, these heroes of renown through human women. So they married them. So there was this understanding of marriage. And of course, you have to assume that they were supposed to marry female angels because there were female angels. So my point in all this is it's not so much to say, absolutely, there's marriage in heaven, although I believe there is, but it's to debunk the idea that there's not marriage in heaven because somehow angels don't have, genitalia. They don't have the ability to reproduce, and they don't get married, so that, we're going to be like them. Well, that's not what the text says. So that debunks that idea. But if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, it's like from verses 26 to the end of the chapter, God makes man in his own image and likeness, and he makes them male and female, and he tells them, be fruitful and multiply. It means have sex. It means, have children, okay? Reproduce, fill the earth. And that happened before the fall. And so obviously we're under the impression they didn't get around to that until after the fall. But, the whole reproductive aspects, and we don't know how all that works, specifically, there's questions there. But the idea that marriage was something later on or after the fall, and it was just for this period of time and not for eternity, that's not biblical. Adam was taken out of the dust of the earth. Eve was taken out of Adam, and they were to come together to be one, male and female. That's what marriage is. That's the relationship. And they were to be fruitful and multiply even before the fall. That was God's plan from the beginning, which if you don't want to call that marriage, you don't have to call it marriage. But the idea that we're going to go to heaven and, we're not going to become one and we're all just going to walk around a little bit different and no one's going to care, it just doesn't seem biblical to me. I just think there's going to be more than what we think. It's going to be better. It's going to be the way God intended it from the beginning. Just a thought.